Nothing cuts deeper than your own family telling you that you're worthless. There's no pain quite like being thrown away by the people who were supposed to love you most. Bjorik One-Arm knew this pain well when his brothers and sons cast him out. They called him broken after his battle wounds. They said he was too weak to lead their clan. So he walked into the frozen wilderness alone. He found an old stone hall buried in snow that everyone said was cursed. For years he rebuilt it with his bare hands, stone by stone, beam by beam. When winter brought famine to his people, they came begging at his door. But what they found waiting shocked them all. The man they threw away had become something they never expected. What do you think Bjorik did when the family who abandoned him came crawling back? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The silver arm ring had been in his family for 8 generations. Bjorik remembered the weight of it on his left arm, the way it caught firelight during clan gatherings, how it marked him as heir to his father's holdings along the fjord. Now it rested on his brother Ericsson's arm, where it had been placed the day they declared Bjorik unfit to lead. That was 3 winters past, but the memory burned as fresh as yesterday's fire, before the exile, before the shame. Bjorik Ironhand, as he was known then, had been everything a Norse warrior should be. Standing nearly 7 feet tall with shoulders broad enough to block a doorway, he commanded respect through presence alone. His hair, the color of winter wheat, fell to his shoulders in the traditional warrior's knot. His beard, thick and well-groomed, bore the silver threads that spoke of wisdom earned through battle. At 48 winters, he had led more successful raids than any warrior in living memory. The settlement of Ironwood Fjord sprawled along the protected inlet like a sleeping giant. Smoke rose from dozens of longhouses, their peaked roofs heavy with snow, even now in early spring. The great hall stood at the center, its dragon-carved posts reaching toward grey skies. This was where Bjorik had grown up, where he had proven himself worthy of leadership, where he had planned to die an honored elder. The fjord itself stretched like a blue-black wound between towering cliffs, its waters so deep that no man had ever found bottom. Pine forests climbed the mountainsides in dark green waves, broken only by waterfalls that turned to ice columns in winter. It was harsh country that bred hard people, and Bjorik had been the hardest of them all. His father, Thorek the Bold, had ruled this land with an iron fist wrapped in wisdom. Under his guidance, their clan had prospered. Their longships returned heavy with silver and thralls. Their stores remained full, even in the leanest years. When raiders came seeking easy prey, they found only death waiting in the fjord's narrow mouth. Bjorik had been groomed for this inheritance from childhood. He learned to read the weather in cloud formations, to judge a man's worth by how he carried his blade, to know when mercy served better than violence. His younger brothers, Ericsson and Thorvald, had always accepted this natural order. They were skilled warriors in their own right, but they lacked the vision that leadership demanded. The turning point came during what should have been a simple coastal raid. A rival clan had been stealing their fishing grounds, and Thorek decided the insult required response. It was meant to be Bjorik's final test, before formally receiving his father's blessing. A chance to prove he could lead men in battle and bring them home whole. The morning mist clung to their longship as they approached the enemy settlement. 23 warriors at their peak, tested in countless battles, confident in their strength. Bjorik stood at the prow, his battle-worn shield bearing the clan's raven symbol strapped to his left arm, his father's sword singing in his right hand. The shield had been his grandfather's before him, its leather and iron scarred by 100 conflicts. The painted raven seemed to watch with intelligent eyes, and Bjorik had always felt his ancestors' presence when he carried it into battle. It represented more than protection. It was heritage made manifest. The weight of honor passed from father to son. Everything went wrong at once. The enemy had laid a trap, concealing twice as many warriors in the settlement as expected. What should have been a swift strike became a desperate fighting retreat to their ship. Bjorik found himself holding the rear guard as his men fell back. his shield taking blow after blow from enemy axes. The berserker came from his blind spot, a massive warrior wearing only a bearskin, foam on his lips, eyes rolled back until only whites showed. Bjorik managed to turn aside the worst of the attack, but the berserker's axe punched through his shield and bit deep into the arm beneath. The pain was beyond description. Bone shattered, nerves severed, muscle torn away in bloody strips. Bjorik's world narrowed to a red haze of agony and the taste of his own blood. Somehow he stayed on his feet. Somehow he kept fighting, but his shield arm hung useless at his side. His men got him to the ship. They got him home. The healers saved his life but could not save his arm. What remained was a twisted, withered thing that barely functioned, good enough to hold a cup or guide a rope, but useless for the shield work that defined Norse combat. Recovery took months. Bjorik lay in his father's hall, listening to the sounds of normal life continuing around him while his world crumbled. Visitors came at first, offering encouragement and empty promises that things would return to normal. As the weeks passed, the visits became less frequent, the promises more hollow. His sons, Magnus and Leif, were young men now, blooded warriors with ambitions of their own. Magnus, the elder at 26, had his father's height but his mother's quick temper. Leif, 3 years younger, possessed a cunning that sometimes worried even Bjorik. They tried to show proper respect during his healing, but he could see the calculations behind their eyes. A crippled father meant opportunity for those bold enough to seize it. The brothers were more direct in their assessment. Eriksson, 2 years Bjorik's junior, but untouched by serious wounds, began speaking openly about the need for strong leadership. Thorvald, the youngest at 38, had always resented being third in line. Now he saw his chance to improve his position. The clan needs a war leader who can actually hold a shield, Eriksson said one evening, his words carrying clearly across the hall. He did not address Bjorik directly, but spoke to their father as if the injured man were not present. The coastal clans grow bold. They think our strength has weakened, Thorvald nodded gravely. A leader who cannot fight cannot inspire others to fight. The men need to see strength, not pity. Bjorik felt each word like another axe blow. He tried to argue, to demonstrate that his mind remained sharp, even if his body was damaged. He could still plan raids, still negotiate treaties, still judge disputes with wisdom earned through experience. But in a culture that valued physical prowess above all else, his arguments fell on deaf ears. The final blow came from his own sons. "Father," Magnus said during a particularly cruel family gathering, "perhaps it is time to step aside with honor. Let those who can still fight lead the fighting." Leif, ever the politician, softened the words without changing their meaning. "You could become an advisor, father. Your wisdom would still guide us, but from a position more suited to your current capabilities. As if he were some old dog put out to pasture. Thorek the Bold lived up to his name in the end, defending his eldest son's right to inherit despite his injuries. But even a father's love could not hold back the tide of clan politics forever. When Thorek died that winter, peacefully in his sleep, the god's gift to a warrior grown old, the succession question exploded into open conflict. The clan assembly was meant to formalize what everyone expected, Bjorik taking his father's place as Jarl. Instead, it became a trial of his worth. One by one, respected warriors rose to speak about the need for strong leadership in dangerous times. They praised Bjorik's past achievements while expressing doubts about his future effectiveness. Can he lead a shield wall? Astorm the blacksmith, a man whose good opinion carried weight. Can he inspire confidence in young warriors? Wondered Astrid Crow-Eye, the settlement's most powerful woman. Will enemy chiefs see strength or weakness when they look upon him? This from Ragnar Splitbeard, whose own battle scars made him an authority on surviving wounds. The questions came like arrows, each one finding its mark. Bjorik answered as best he could, drawing on everything he had learned about leadership, but he could see minds turning against him. Fear was stronger than loyalty, and the clan feared what would happen under a diminished leader. The final vote was closer than his enemies hoped, but not close enough to save him. Eriksson would be Jarl. Thorvald would serve as his war chief. Magnus and Leif could remain in the settlement if they accepted their uncle's authority without question. As for Bjorik, he was welcome to stay as well. In a minor capacity befitting his limitations, the humiliation was complete. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built, everything he had hoped to pass to his sons, gone in a single evening. The silver arm ring was removed from his arm and placed on Ericsson's in a ceremony that felt more like a funeral than a celebration. That night Bjorik made his choice. Rather than accept charity from those who had betrayed him, rather than endure daily reminders of his fall from grace, he would leave. Let them see how well they managed without him. Let them discover whether power was easier to seize than to hold. He took only what was truly his father's sword, his grandfather's damaged shield, a handful of silver coins, and the clothes on his back. No one tried to stop him as he walked away from the only home he had ever known. Some watched from their doorways, but none spoke. Whether from shame or relief he could not tell. The morning he left, snow began to fall, thick, heavy flakes that muffled sound and blurred the familiar landscape into something alien. Bjorik pulled his cloak tight and set his face toward the mountains. Behind him, smoke still rose from the settlement's chimneys. Ahead lay only wilderness and whatever fate the gods had prepared for a broken warrior seeking his own path. The silver arm ring was gone, but the memory of its weight remained. Someday, perhaps, he would prove that leadership required more than the ability to swing a sword. Someday, perhaps, those who had cast him aside would understand what they had lost. The wooden drinking horn had belonged to the hall's last master, whoever that might have been. Bjorik found it on the third day, buried beneath a collapsed beam and years of accumulated debris. The horn was carved with intricate knotwork patterns and inlaid with silver wire, the work of a master craftsman. Despite decades of abandonment, it remained whole, as if waiting for someone worthy to claim it. Bjorik had been walking for 6 days when he found the ruins. The mountains had not been kind to an injured man traveling alone. Each night brought temperatures that turned breath to ice crystals and made his damaged arm ache like a fresh wound. He sheltered where he could, beneath overhangs, in caves barely large enough for his massive frame, once in the hollow of a fallen tree that creaked ominously with every gust of wind. Food was scarce. His supplies had run low on the 4th day, and hunting with one functioning arm proved nearly impossible. He managed to snare a few rabbits and catch fish from mountain streams with his bare hands, but it was not enough. Hunger gnawed at his belly like a living thing, and more than once he considered turning back. Pride kept him moving forward. Pride and the memory of pitying looks from people who had once called him friend. The hall appeared through the morning mist like something from a dream or a nightmare. It crouched in a sheltered valley between 2 peaks, its stone walls dark with age and partially collapsed. Snow had drifted against the northern side, creating strange sculptures that shifted and changed as wind carved new patterns. The roof had fallen in completely, leaving only skeletal timber reaching toward grey sky like the ribs of some enormous beast. Local legend spoke of cursed places in the high mountains, halls where ancient kings had committed terrible crimes, valleys where the dead walked on moonless nights, peaks where the old gods still held sway. This place had that feel about it, the weight of dark history pressing down like a physical force. Most men would have turned away. Most men would have made the sign against evil and sought shelter elsewhere. But Bjorik was not most men, and he was past caring about curses. What more could the gods do to him that had not already been done? He approached slowly, his good hand resting on his sword hilt. The massive wooden doors had long since rotted away, leaving only iron hinges hanging like broken wings. Inside, debris covered everything. Fallen stones, rotted timber, the bones of small animals that had sheltered here and died. But the foundation was solid, the walls mostly intact, and the basic structure sound. Someone had built this place to last. The stones were fitted together with the skill of master masons, each one placed with care and sealed with mortar that had hardened to near stone consistency. Even in ruin, it radiated strength and permanence. This had been a king's hall once, or close to it. Bjorik spent that first day exploring, mapping the space in his mind. The main hall was enormous, large enough for 100 warriors to feast in comfort. Side chambers had probably served as sleeping quarters, storage rooms, perhaps a private apartment for the master and his family. At the hall's heart stood the remains of a great hearth, its stones blackened by countless fires but still solid. That night, he built his first fire in the ancient hearth. The smoke found its way up through gaps in the collapsed roof, and for a brief moment the space felt alive again. Shadows danced on stone walls, and Bjorik could almost hear the echo of old voices. The clash of cups raised in toast, the songs of Scold telling tales of heroes long dead. He made his decision then, sitting alone in the ruins, with his fire crackling and snow falling through the broken roof. This would be his home, not a temporary shelter while he decided what to do next, but a true home, a place he would rebuild with his own hands, where no one could cast him out or declare him unworthy. The work began at first light. Clearing the debris was backbreaking labor for a man with 2 good arms. For Bjorik, it was agony. His damaged arm could assist with light tasks, but could not bear real weight. Every beam that needed moving, every stone that required lifting, had to be managed with his right arm alone. His back screamed protests. His good arm trembled with exhaustion. But he persevered. The drinking horn was his first real treasure. Finding it felt like a sign from the gods, or perhaps from whatever spirits haunted this place. The previous master, whoever he had been, approved of Bjorik's presence. The hall wanted to live again. He cleaned the horn with melted snow and examined it by firelight. The silver inlay depicted a hunting scene, men on horseback pursuing a great stag through a forest. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, each figure carved with loving detail, each tree and rock rendered with artistic precision. This was not the possession of some minor chieftain, but of a man of genuine power and refinement. The horn became his constant companion, his link to the hall's mysterious past. He drank from it each evening, toasting whatever ghosts might be watching, asking their permission to continue his work. If they objected, they gave no sign. Days blended into weeks as the work consumed him. He developed systems for moving heavy objects alone, levers and ramps, and careful applications of physics learned through hard experience. His body adapted to the constant strain, muscles in his good arm growing thick as ship's rope. His damaged arm, while still largely useless for heavy work, regained some feeling and flexibility. The first major milestone came when he managed to clear the main hall completely. Standing in that vast, empty space, looking up at open sky through the broken roof, he felt something he had not experienced since his injury: pride. Not the fierce warrior's pride of his youth, but something deeper and more enduring. This was his hall now, bought not with blood or politics, but with honest labor. Spring's arrival brought new challenges and opportunities. The snow melted, revealing more of the hall's original structure and creating muddy conditions that made work harder. But it also brought fresh water in abundance and the first green growth that would eventually provide food. More importantly, it brought the understanding that he could survive here, that this was not mere stubborn defiance, but a genuine new beginning. The drinking horn sat on a stone shelf he had cleared near the hearth, catching firelight and gleaming like a beacon. Each evening, he would fill it with water or weak ale made from foraged ingredients and drink to the day's progress. The ritual became sacred to him, a way of marking time and honoring both his effort and the hall's gradual resurrection. Visitors were rare, but not unknown. Occasionally, hunters or travelers would stumble across his valley, usually by accident. They would stare at the sight of a giant man rebuilding an ancient ruin with his bare hands, whisper among themselves about madness and curses, and hurry away. Word would spread in taverns and markets, the tale of the broken warrior who had claimed a cursed hall, who worked like a man possessed to restore what had been lost. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Bjorik had found his purpose, and their opinions mattered less than dust in the wind. The hall was teaching him patience, teaching him that some things could not be rushed or forced. Stone by stone, beam by beam, it would rise again. Not as it had been, but as it was meant to be. A place of strength and refuge. A home worthy of the man who had claimed it. Each night, he would hold the carved horn up to the firelight and study its intricate patterns. The hunt depicted there seemed to shift in the flickering flames. The great stag, always just ahead of its pursuers, always beyond reach. It reminded him that some prizes were worth any effort, any sacrifice, any amount of time. His haul was such a prize. His new life was such a prize, and he would build both with his own hands, no matter how long it took. The iron chisel had been forged by a master smith, its edge keen enough to split stone along the grain, its handle worn smooth by countless hands. Bjorik found it buried beneath rubble in what had once been a workshop, and it became as essential to his daily existence as food or fire. Without it, the precise work of fitting stones would have been impossible. Summer brought both blessing and torment to the High Valley. The blessing came in the form of abundant game, edible plants, and weather warm enough to work from dawn until dusk. The torment came from mosquitoes that swarmed in clouds thick enough to choke a man, and from the knowledge that winter would return all too soon. Bjorik had developed a routine that governed his days like the rhythm of his heartbeat. Dawn meant checking his snares for rabbits or ptarmigan, gathering what edible plants he could find, and planning the day's construction work. Morning was for the heaviest labor, moving stones, raising beams, tasks that required his full strength. Midday brought food and rest in whatever shade he could find. Afternoon was for detailed work, carving, fitting, the precise adjustments that turned a pile of rocks into a wall. The workshop had yielded more than just the chisel. Whoever had owned this hall before possessed remarkable skill as a craftsman. Bjorik found chisels of different sizes, hammers with heads forged from the finest steel, even a small anvil that must have weighed 200 pounds. Moving it alone had nearly broken him, but now it sat beside his hearth like a faithful hound, ready for whatever metalwork the reconstruction required. The tools spoke of a man who understood that true strength came not just from muscle but from knowledge, from understanding how leverage could move great weights, how the grain of wood determined where it would split, how stone could be shaped with patience rather than brute force. These lessons had taken Bjorik months to learn, and each breakthrough felt like a gift from the gods. His biggest challenge remained the roof. The original timbers had been massive, tree trunks 40 feet long and 3 feet thick at the base. Such trees still grew in the valley below, but cutting them alone and hauling them up the mountainside presented problems that kept him awake at night. He had neither the tools nor the manpower for such a task, yet without a roof, the hall would never truly live again. The solution came from an unexpected source. Old Gunnar the Wanderer appeared one morning like mist made manifest. Bjorik had heard his approach. No man walked silently with a wooden leg, but had not expected to see a familiar face emerge from the tree line. Gunnar had been ancient when Bjorik was a boy, a grizzled veteran of forgotten wars who drifted from settlement to settlement, trading stories for meals and shelter. "So the tales are true," Gunnar said by way of greeting, his one good eye taking in the partially rebuilt walls with approval. "Bjorik Ironhand has claimed the cursed hall of Thornwick." "Just Bjorik now," he replied, setting down the stone he had been shaping. "And I suppose it has a name, then?" Gunnar laughed, a sound like gravel in a leather pouch. "Aye, it has a name and a history too, if you care to hear it. King Thornwick the Mad built this place 300 years past. Finest hall north of the great fjords, they say, until the night he slaughtered his own family in their beds and fled into the mountains. Some say he still wanders these peaks, looking for someone to forgive his crimes." The old wanderer studied Bjorik's handiwork with the eye of a man who had seen many things built and destroyed. "You work alone?" "I work alone. Foolish. But I respect foolish men. They accomplish impossible things." Gunnar hobbled closer, running weathered fingers along a newly fitted wall. "This is good work. Clean joints, proper mortar. Your father taught you well." They shared a meal that evening, rabbit stew seasoned with wild herbs and the last of Bjorik's precious salt. Gunnar told tales of distant lands while Bjorik listened with half an ear, more interested in the old man's casual comments about construction techniques he had observed in his travels, seen halls built in the Greek lands where they use pulleys and counterweights to lift stones bigger than houses. Gunnar mentioned between bites, "Clever bastards, those southerners. Work smarter instead of harder." The comment lodged in Bjorik's mind like a splinter. Work smarter, not harder. He had been approaching the roof problem like a warrior, through direct assault and brute force. But perhaps there was another way. Gunnar stayed 3 days, long enough to help Bjorik raise a particularly troublesome wall section that had been defeating his best efforts. The old wanderer's stories and advice were payment enough for the meals and shelter, but when he left, he also left behind something more valuable. Hope. "You'll finish this," Gunnar said as he prepared to depart. "I've seen many men start great works and few complete them. You have the look of a finisher." Alone again, Bjorik threw himself into solving the roof problem with new determination. He studied the ruined timbers, measuring their dimensions and calculating weights. He scouted the valley below, marking trees of the proper size and considering routes up the mountainside. Most importantly, he began designing a system of pulleys and levers based on Gunnar's casual description of southern building techniques. The iron chisel became his constant companion during this phase, used not just for shaping stone, but for carving the intricate wooden components his pulley system would require. Each piece had to be precisely crafted, a few degrees off in angle or a fraction of an inch. Wrong in dimension could mean the difference between success and catastrophic failure. Summer's end brought the first serious test of his innovations. He had identified a fallen oak in the valley that would provide perfect roof timber if he could get it up the mountain. The tree had come down in some long-ago storm and had seasoned where it lay, making it lighter than green wood, but still immensely heavy. The cutting took 2 days of careful work with a handsaw, sectioning the trunk into manageable lengths while preserving the necessary dimensions required more precision than he had thought possible for one man to achieve. Each cut had to be perfect. Waste meant starting over with a different tree, and winter was approaching too quickly for such setbacks. The real test came with the hauling. His pulley system consisted of ropes threaded through wooden wheels, anchored to carefully chosen trees and rock formations along a zigzag path up the mountainside. In theory, it would multiply his strength, enough to move timber that would otherwise require a team of oxen. Theory and practice proved to be different things entirely. The first beam made it halfway up the mountain before a rope snapped, sending the timber crashing back down the slope and nearly taking Bjorik with it. The second attempt succeeded, but took an entire day of exhausting work for a single piece of wood. At that rate, completing the roof would take years, but he had succeeded. One massive beam now lay in his construction yard, proof that his system could work. The problems were solvable: stronger ropes, better anchors, improved techniques. By winter's end, he would have the knowledge needed to roof his hall properly. That night, he filled his carved horn with ale brewed from wild berries and raised it toward the stars. Somewhere among those distant lights, perhaps King Thornwick's tortured spirit looked down and approved of what he saw. The cursed hall was awakening from its long sleep, and this time it would shelter honor instead of madness. The weathered map was drawn on treated sealskin, its edges cracked with age, but its markings still clear. Bjorik discovered it wrapped in oiled cloth, beneath loose stones, in what had been the hall's treasure chamber. The map showed trade routes through the northern mountains, marked with symbols indicating safe camps, freshwater springs, and dangerous passes. Most importantly, it revealed why someone had built a hall. In this remote valley, it commanded the only practical route between the coastal settlements and the inland trading posts. Winter arrived like an army with banners of ice and snow. The first blizzard caught Bjorik with only part of the hall properly roofed, forcing him to huddle in one small chamber while wind howled through gaps in his construction like the voices of angry spirits. For 3 days, he could do nothing but feed his fire and wait for the storm to pass. The isolation was harder than the cold. During the busy months of construction, he had been too occupied to dwell on his exile from human company. But winter brought long nights, with nothing to do but think, and his thoughts inevitably turned to the family that had cast him aside. Were they warm and well-fed in their comfortable hall? Did they ever wonder about the man they had driven into the wilderness? Did his sons ask about their father, or had they already forgotten him entirely? He found solace in studying the ancient map by firelight. Someone had drawn it with loving care, noting not just the practical information a trader would need, but also personal observations about the country. Here was marked a particularly beautiful waterfall, there a peak shaped like a sleeping giant, over there a valley where wildflowers bloomed in extraordinary profusion. The mapmaker had been more than a mere merchant. He had been someone who loved the land he traveled. The map explained much about Thornwick Hall's original purpose. This valley was not just a retreat from the world, but a strategic position, controlling trade between vastly different regions. Coastal settlements rich in fish and furs could exchange their goods for iron tools and grain from the inland territories. The hall's master would have collected tolls from passing caravans while offering protection from bandits and guidance through treacherous mountain passes. It was a good business for a man with the wisdom to see opportunity where others saw only empty wilderness. Spring's return brought both relief and urgent necessity. The roof sections he had completed over the summer had held well, but much work remained. More importantly, his food stores were running dangerously low. The dried fish and preserved berries that had sustained him through winter would not last much longer. He needed to expand his territory, find new sources of food, perhaps even establish contact with distant settlements for trade. The map became his guide to this expanded world. Following its markings, he discovered a network of hunting trails that connected his valley to the broader region. Some led to mountain meadows where deer came to graze. Others revealed fishing streams so rich with trout that a patient man could catch enough in a morning to feed himself for days. Most valuable was the path marked as leading to Iron Springs, a place where the map indicated metal could be found. Following the route took him 2 days of hard walking through forests so thick that noon looked like twilight. But at the journey's end, he found exactly what the ancient cartographer had promised, a series of natural hot springs surrounded by outcroppings of iron-rich rock. The implications were staggering. With access to raw iron and the knowledge to work it, skills he had learned watching smiths in his father's settlement, he could forge the tools and hardware his construction project desperately needed. No more making do with salvaged materials or trading precious supplies for basic necessities. He could be truly self-sufficient. The discovery changed his entire approach to the hall's reconstruction. Instead of rushing to complete the building before supplies ran out, he could take time to do things properly. He could craft custom ironwork for hinges and locks, forge the nails and brackets that would hold his roof securely, even create decorative elements that would mark the hall as the work of a master craftsman. Building a forge at Iron Springs became his summer project. The hot springs provided natural drafts that would help maintain proper temperatures, and the surrounding stone was perfect for constructing a furnace. Working alone made the task monumentally difficult, holding pieces in position while securing them, managing the complex timing required for proper metalwork, learning through trial and error what master smiths spent years teaching apprentices, but he persevered, driven by visions of what his hall could become with proper materials. The first iron bar he successfully smelted was crude and full of impurities, but it was his iron, forged with his own hands from ore he had found himself. The second was better, the third better still. By summer's end, he was producing metal of quality equal to any settlement smith. The ancient map revealed other secrets as well. Symbols he had initially dismissed as decorative marks turned out to indicate seasonal phenomena when specific passes became navigable, where avalanche danger was highest, which valleys filled with dangerous gases during certain weather conditions. The knowledge embedded in those careful drawings represented a lifetime of hard-won experience. Autumn brought an unexpected test of everything he had learned. A yearly blizzard trapped him at Iron Springs with winter supplies still at the hall. For 2 weeks, he lived on whatever food he could find in the immediate area while working frantically to forge the hardware he would need for final roof installation. Cold made the metal brittle, snow obscured his fuel supply, and loneliness gnawed at his spirit like a physical hunger. But he endured, and when the weather cleared, he made the journey back to his hall, carrying more than 50 pounds of custom ironwork, hinges for the great doors he planned to carve, brackets for supporting roof beams, decorative elements that would transform rough construction into true craftsmanship. Each piece represented hours of careful work, and together they would elevate his hall from mere shelter to something approaching its former glory. The map had given him more than practical knowledge. It had shown him that he was not the first to see opportunity in apparent isolation. Someone else had looked at this harsh country and seen its potential, had built something lasting in a place others considered cursed. That ancient predecessor had failed in the end, driven to madness by whatever demons haunted his soul. But his map remained, a gift across centuries to someone who might succeed where he had not. Standing in his partially completed hall, with winter approaching once again, Bjorik raised his carved horn in salute to that unknown cartographer. The man's careful drawings had opened up a world of possibilities, had shown him paths to the resources he needed for true success. The hall would be completed, not just as shelter, but as a monument to the vision and persistence of broken men who refused to accept defeat. The stone rune was carved deep into the foundation of the hall's eastern wall, hidden beneath centuries of accumulated dirt and moss. Bjorik uncovered it while digging for the expansion he planned, a smaller building that would serve as workshop and storage. The rune was unlike any he had seen before, more intricate than the simple marks used for writing, almost alive in its complexity. According to the old knowledge passed down from his grandfather, this was a binding rune, meant to hold something in place forever. 2 years had passed since his exile. 2 years of solitary labor that had transformed both the hall and the man who rebuilt it. Bjorik's body bore the marks of his work, calluses thick as leather on his remaining hand, muscles developed through constant lifting and hauling, scars from countless small accidents with tools and stone. But the changes went deeper than flesh. The desperate, bitter man who had fled into the wilderness was becoming something else, someone who found purpose in creation rather than destruction. The hall itself was nearly complete. His innovative pulley systems had allowed him to install massive roof beams that would have been impossible for one man to manage through traditional methods. Custom ironwork from his forge at Iron Springs secured every joint and connection. The great hearth, rebuilt with stones fitted so precisely that no mortar showed between them, could warm the entire space even on the coldest nights. Yet something was wrong. It had started as a feeling more than anything concrete, a sense that his work was being watched, evaluated, perhaps even judged. Tools would be found in different positions than where he had left them. Stones he was certain he had shaped to specific dimensions would prove to be slightly different when he came to install them. Small things easy to dismiss as the products of fatigue or distraction, but the feeling persisted and grew stronger. The binding rune changed everything. Its discovery confirmed what Bjorik had begun to suspect, that Thornwick Hall was more than just cursed by its violent history. Something had been deliberately bound to this place, something that the original builder had felt compelled to contain rather than banish. Old Gunnar had mentioned the legend in passing during his brief visit, but Bjorik was beginning to think it might be more than mere story. King Thornwick the Mad had indeed slaughtered his family, But perhaps that act had been the result of influence rather than simple madness. Perhaps something had whispered to him in the dark hours before dawn, promising power in exchange for terrible deeds. The presence, for lack of a better word, seemed strongest in the evening hours, when shadows lengthened and fire cast dancing patterns on stone walls. Bjorik would sense movement in his peripheral vision, hear footsteps that stopped when he turned his head, feel the weight of attention from empty corners of the hall. He was not afraid. Fear had been burned out of him by exile and hardship, leaving behind something more useful, caution mixed with curiosity. If there was indeed something bound to this place, it had not harmed him during 2 years of reconstruction. Perhaps it even approved of what he was doing, bringing life back to halls that had stood empty for centuries. The workshop expansion proceeded despite, or perhaps because of, the mysterious presence. Digging the foundation required moving tons of earth with nothing but shovel and wheelbarrow, work that left him exhausted, but oddly satisfied. There was something deeply peaceful about such labor, a rhythm that connected him to every man who had ever shaped the earth to serve human needs. It was while digging that he found the second artifact, a silver pendant, bearing the image of a tree with roots extending deep underground and branches reaching toward the sky. The pendant was wrapped in decayed silk, suggesting it had been buried deliberately rather than lost by accident. The workmanship was extraordinary, each leaf and root rendered with loving detail, each branch following natural growth patterns that spoke of an artist who truly understood his subject. The tree symbol was ancient beyond memory, older than Christianity, older than the worship of Odin and Thor, reaching back to times when men had seen divinity in every grove and sacred meaning in the turn of seasons. It represented the connection between earth and sky, between the visible world and whatever lay beyond mortal understanding. Holding the pendant, Bjorik felt a strange certainty that it had belonged to Thornwick himself, not the mad king who had committed murder in these halls, but the man he had been before madness claimed him. The pendant spoke of someone who had loved the natural world, who had built his hall in this remote valley, not just for strategic advantage, but because he felt drawn to its wild beauty. What had changed him? What had transformed a nature-loving ruler into a killer who butchered his own blood? The answer might lie in the binding rune itself. As Bjorik studied the complex symbol by firelight, he began to understand its purpose. This was not a rune meant to contain evil, but to contain something far more dangerous: temptation. The kind of whispered promises that could turn a good man into a monster if he listened too long or too carefully. Perhaps Thornwick had tried to bind whatever darkness he had unleashed, had carved the rune as a desperate attempt to undo damage already done. Perhaps he had succeeded in containing the threat, but at the cost of his own sanity. The effort to maintain the binding, driving him to act his normal self, would have found unthinkable. If so, then Bjorik's reconstruction work had not disturbed whatever lay bound beneath the hall. It had strengthened the ancient constraints. Every stone properly placed, every beam securely fastened, every piece of ironwork perfectly fitted, added to the hall's structural integrity and, perhaps, to its spiritual defenses as well. The thought brought him comfort during the long winter, nights when shadows seemed to move independently of firelight, and the wind through his new roof. Timbers sounded almost like whispered words. He was not just rebuilding a hall, he was maintaining a prison that kept something dangerous from escaping into the wider world. The silver pendant became a talisman he wore always, hidden beneath his shirt, where its weight reminded him of responsibilities beyond his own survival and comfort. He was the guardian now, whether he had chosen the role or not. The hall's former master had failed in his duty, succumbing to whatever influence he had tried to contain. But Bjorik would not fail. He had already lost everything that mattered to him: family, position, respect. What remained was purpose, and that was enough. The binding rune watched over his work like a benevolent eye, its deep carving collecting shadows that shifted with the firelight but never quite disappeared entirely. As long as the rune remained intact and the hall stood strong, whatever slept beneath would remain sleeping. And Bjorik would remain on guard, a broken warrior who had found his true calling in keeping the world safe from ancient darkness. The bronze mirror was cracked down the middle, but still reflected clearly on both sides of the break. Bjorik found it in what had been the master's private chamber, wrapped in layers of protective cloth and hidden in a wall cavity that had escaped centuries of weather and decay. The mirror's surface showed more than just his own reflection. Sometimes, in certain lights, it revealed glimpses of the hall as it had been in its glory days, populated by figures that moved with purpose, through rooms filled with warmth and laughter. The third winter was the hardest yet. Not because of cold or privation, but because of dreams. They came every night now, vivid beyond anything he had experienced. In them, he walked through his completed hall as its rightful master, but the halls were wrong somehow, too grand, too rich, filled with treasures that had never existed and could never be rightfully his. In the dreams, he commanded hundreds of warriors, ruled over vast territories, possessed wealth beyond the imagination of kings, and always, in the deepest part of the dreams, a voice whispered that these visions could become reality. All he needed to do was make certain small compromises, perform certain rituals, swear certain oaths to powers that predated human memory. He would wake gasping, his damaged arm aching as if freshly wounded, the taste of copper filling his mouth. The binding rune in the foundation seemed to pulse with its own faint light during these episodes, as if drawing power from the very attempts to subvert its purpose. The bronze mirror helped him understand what was happening. When he looked into its cracked surface during these troubled mornings, he sometimes saw not his own weathered face, but that of another man, younger, unmarked by battle, but with eyes that held a terrible hunger. King Thornwick, as he had been before madness claimed him, when the whispers first began. The parallel was unmistakable. Both of them had been broken men when they found this place. Thornwick driven from his original kingdom by some unnamed disgrace, Bjorik cast out by his own family. Both had poured themselves into rebuilding the hall, finding purpose in creation. And both had been offered the same bargain by whatever lay bound beneath the stone. But where Thornwick had eventually succumbed, Bjorik understood the trap. The whispers were not offering him power, they were offering him the illusion of power. The promise that he could force the world to acknowledge his worth through supernatural means, rather than earning it through honest effort. It was the same temptation that had destroyed his predecessor, the same corruption that had turned love of creation into lust for domination. Understanding did not make the dreams easier to bear. If anything, knowing what they represented made them more disturbing. Each night brought new visions of what he could have if he only abandoned his principles. Reunification with his family, but as their overlord rather than their equal. Respect from his clan, but born of fear rather than admiration. A legacy that would endure, but built on the suffering of others. The bronze mirror became his anchor to reality. Each morning, he would look into its fractured surface and remind himself who he truly was. Not a fallen king seeking restoration through dark bargains, but a craftsman building something honest with his own hands. The crack down the mirror's center served as a perfect metaphor. Reality was flawed, broken, imperfect, but it was real in a way that no fantasy could ever be. Spring brought visitors to his valley, and with them, the first real test of the man he was becoming. A merchant caravan had been following the old trade routes marked on his ancient map, seeking passage through the mountains to reach inland markets before the brief summer season ended. Their guide had abandoned them at the first sign of bad weather, leaving them lost in terrain that could kill the unprepared. Bjorik found them huddled around a failing fire in a grove half a day's walk from his hall. 5 men and 2 women, all of them soft-looking merchants from the coastal settlements, all of them facing death in the mountains. They had been fool enough to enter without proper preparation. The old Bjorik, the warrior who had led raids and measured worth in terms of battle skill, might have seen them as opportunities for profit or amusement. The broken exile who had fled into the wilderness might have turned away, too bitter to care about the fate of strangers. But the man he was becoming, the guardian of an ancient hall and keeper of dangerous secrets, had responsibilities that transcended personal grievances. "You are lost," he said, announcing his presence in a way that would not startle them into doing something foolish. Their leader, a portly man with the soft hands of someone who had never done real work, looked up with desperate hope. "We seek the mountain passes to the inland territories. Our guide fled in the night, taking most of our supplies. The passes are treacherous this time of year. Even with a guide, you would be fortunate to survive the crossing." "We have silver," the merchant said quickly. "We can pay for guidance, for shelter, for whatever aid you might provide." Silver, the old currency of the world below, precious metal that could buy almost anything from men who valued material wealth above all else. Once such an offer might have tempted him. Now it seemed almost quaint. "I do not need your silver," Bjorik replied, "but neither will I leave you to die in the mountains. You will come with me." He led them to his hall, watching their faces change as they took in the scope of his reconstruction work. These were people who understood quality when they saw it, who could recognize the difference between mere shelter and true craftsmanship. Their respect was honest, earned through demonstration rather than demanded through fear. For 3 days he sheltered them while they recovered their strength, and he prepared supplies for their journey. In return, they shared news from the outside world, tales of wars and politics that seemed petty and distant from his mountain perspective. His old life, the settlement where he had been born and raised, was mentioned only in passing. His family prospered under Ericsson's leadership, though there were whispers of growing tensions with neighboring clans. When they departed, the merchant leader pressed a small leather pouch into his hand, despite Bjorik's earlier refusal of payment. "Not silver," the man explained when Bjorik started to object. "Seeds, vegetables that grow well in mountain soil, if you know how to tend them. A gift between friends." The word carried more weight than any amount of precious metal. These strangers had seen him as he truly was, not a broken exile or a potential threat, but a man worthy of friendship and respect. That night, he looked into the bronze mirror and saw only his own reflection, unmarked by shadow or supernatural influence. The whispers that had plagued his dreams were silent. Whatever lay bound beneath the hall recognized that its latest attempt at corruption had failed. Just as all the others had failed, the leather-bound journal was hidden beneath a loose stone in the hall's foundation, precisely where the binding rune was carved deepest. The journal belonged to King Thornwick himself, and its pages revealed the truth that changed everything Bjorik thought he knew about the hall, the curse, and his own destiny. The journal's existence came to light by accident. Bjorik had been reinforcing the foundation where winter frost had caused some settling when his iron chisel struck something that was neither stone nor earth. Careful excavation revealed a sealed bronze box, green with age but intact. Inside lay the journal, wrapped in oiled leather and preserved as if it had been placed there yesterday. The first entries were mundane, a king's daily observations about governance, trade negotiations, the small pleasures and petty frustrations of ruling a northern kingdom. Thornwick wrote with intelligence and wit, showing himself to be exactly the sort of thoughtful leader who would see opportunity in a remote mountain hall controlling vital trade routes. But as the entries progressed, darker themes emerged. "The dreams have begun again," read one passage dated 3 months after Thornwick had claimed the hall. "Always the same vision. My brother's face as he fell upon my sword, his blood steaming in the morning cold. I tell myself it was necessary, that a kingdom cannot have 2 kings, but the dreams make mockery of my justifications. Brother's blood." The foundation of Thornwick's madness was not supernatural corruption, but human guilt, the weight of fratricide committed in pursuit of power. He had killed his own brother to secure his throne, then fled to this remote hall when the political consequences became unbearable. "I thought distance would bring peace," another entry revealed. "But the ghosts that haunt a man's conscience travel with him wherever he goes. Each night, Olaf stands at the foot of my bed, pointing to the wound I gave him, asking why blood was more important than brotherhood. The journal painted a picture of a man gradually disintegrating under the weight of his own guilt. Thornwick had not been corrupted by some ancient evil. He had brought his corruption with him, and the isolation of the mountain hall had allowed it to fester until it consumed his sanity entirely. But the most shocking revelation came in the journal's final entries, written in an increasingly erratic hand that spoke of a mind coming apart. I understand now why the old legends spoke of this place as cursed, not because of what lies beneath it, but because of what it reveals about those who seek refuge here. The hall strips away all pretense, all the comfortable lies we tell ourselves about our motives and our worth. In the absolute silence of these mountains, a man hears only the truth about himself. The binding rune was not meant to contain some ancient evil. It was meant to contain me. I carved it in desperate hope that I could bind my guilt to this place, that I could somehow lock away the part of myself that murdered my brother for a crown. But guilt is not some external demon to be exorcised. It is part of the soul, and it cannot be bound or banished, only accepted or denied. Tomorrow I will do what must be done. My family arrived today, drawn by my summons, promising reconciliation and forgiveness. They do not know that they have come to pay the price for my brother's death. 7 lives to balance 1, 7 innocents to join Olaf in whatever realm awaits the dead. Perhaps then the dreams will stop. The truth hit Bjorik like a physical blow. The massacre had not been random madness, but calculated revenge, not against his family, but against himself. Thornwick had murdered his wife and children as punishment for his original sin, believing that adding to his crimes would somehow balance the scales of justice. The irony was devastating. Thornwick had sought to bind his guilt with ancient magic, never understanding that the binding rune was meaningless against self-hatred. He had attributed supernatural power to what was simply the psychological pressure of isolation and remorse. And Bjorik had been making the same mistake. The presence he had sensed in the hall, the dreams that offered false power, the feeling of being watched and judged, none of it had been supernatural. It had been his own mind, processing the trauma of his exile and the challenge of rebuilding his life without the support structures he had always known. The whispers promising easy power were his own subconscious, offering the same temptations that had destroyed Thornwick. The fantasy that external force could solve internal problems, that supernatural shortcuts could substitute for the hard work of genuine change. But unlike Thornwick, Bjorik had not succumbed. Where the king had turned his guilt outward into violence against innocence, Bjorik had channeled his pain into creation. Where Thornwick had sought to bind his demons, Bjorik had chosen to face them honestly and transform them into something useful. The journal's final entry was dated the morning of the massacre, written in a hand so shaky it was barely legible. I have become the very evil I thought I was fighting. The binding rune lies powerless against a corruption that springs from within. Let whoever finds this record know that Thornwick Hall is not cursed by ancient powers, but by the choices of the men who have sheltered here. Choose better than I have chosen. Build something worthy from the ruins I leave behind. Sitting in his rebuilt hall with the journal open before him, Bjorik felt the last pieces of the puzzle fall into place. The hall was not cursed, it was a test, a place where men, stripped of external validation, had to confront who they truly were beneath the roles. Society had assigned them, Thornwick had failed. The test, because he had never been the good king he pretended to be. Beneath the crown and the royal rhetoric lay a man who would kill his own brother for power. The hall's isolation had simply revealed what was already there, but Bjorik was not Thornwick. Yes, he had been cast out by his family, stripped of position and respect. Yes, he had known bitterness and resentment, had dreamed of proving his worth through grand gestures. But when tested by isolation and hardship, he had chosen construction over destruction, service over selfishness. Honest work over easy answers. The bronze mirror on the wall reflected his face with perfect clarity now, showing neither shadow nor supernatural influence. He was exactly who he appeared to be, a man who had lost everything except his integrity, who had built something meaningful with his own hands, who had found peace not through conquest but through acceptance. The binding rune was not magic, it was simply good craftsmanship, carved by a king desperate to believe that symbols could solve problems that only character could address. But Bjorik's work, the careful restoration of walls and roof and foundation, was its own kind of binding. He had bound his pain to purpose, his exile to creation, his brokenness to a strength that no one could take from him, standing in his completed hall, holding the journal that revealed all its secrets. Bjorik understood that he had passed the test Thornwick had failed. He was not a broken warrior seeking supernatural redemption. He was a master craftsman who had created something beautiful from ruins, something honest from deception, something hopeful from despair. The hall was no longer cursed because its current master carried no curse within himself. Whatever dark reputation the place had earned through Thornwick's madness, it was now balanced by the quiet dignity of honest work and genuine achievement. The iron cauldron was massive enough to feed 100 warriors, forged by master smiths and decorated with scenes of abundance, grain harvests, fishing nets full of silverfish, hunters returning with game. Bjorik had found it buried beneath debris in the hall's kitchen, and restoring it had become one of his most satisfying projects. Now it would serve its original purpose once again, though under circumstances its makers could never have imagined. The signs of approaching winter were unmistakable. Ice formed at the edges of streams each morning, only to melt by midday. The leaves on the valley's few deciduous trees had turned brilliant yellow and red, before falling like scattered gold coins on the forest floor. Most telling of all, the animals were moving, deer migrating to sheltered valleys, birds gathering for their southern journey, even the fish in the mountain streams swimming deeper as if seeking protection from coming cold. Bjorik had seen 4 winters in his mountain refuge, but this one felt different. His stores were fuller than ever before, dried meat and fish, preserved vegetables, even some luxuries like honey and salt acquired through trade with passing merchants. His hall was completely restored, every stone in place, every beam secure, every system tested against the worst weather the mountains could deliver. He was ready for winter. The question was whether winter would arrive alone. The trader who brought the news was a grizzled man named Sven Broadback, a regular visitor who had come to appreciate both Bjorik's hospitality and the strategic value of his mountain route. Sven made the journey twice each year, carrying goods between coastal settlements and inland territories, always stopping at the hall for rest and resupply. Heard news from Ironwood Fjord, Sven mentioned casually as they shared an evening meal of roasted venison and wild greens. Hard times have come to your old settlement. Bjorik felt his chest tighten, but kept his voice level. What manner of hard times? The worst winter in living memory, they say. Ice formed so thick on the fjord that ships couldn't reach harbour for 3 months. What food stores they had spoiled from poor preparation, seems the new leadership lacks experience with such challenges. Sven continued his tale between bites, apparently unaware of the emotional impact his words carried. The settlement had lost half its livestock to disease brought on by overcrowding in inadequately prepared shelters. Fishing had been impossible during the ice-bound months, and hunting parties had returned empty-handed from forests stripped bare by competing clans facing similar hardships. Worst of it is the political situation, Sven added, shaking his head sadly. Eriksson's leadership is questioned openly now. Some say he lacks the wisdom his brother possessed. There's talk of civil war among the clan members, those who supported Bjorik's exile against those who regret it now that they see the results. And his sons? Bjorik asked, trying to keep emotion from his voice. Magnus and Leif? They're the ones leading the resistance to their uncle's rule. Seems they've decided their father was wronged after all. Strange how perspective changes when bellies are empty and the future looks grim. That night, Alone in his hall with only firelight for company, Bjorik faced the most difficult decision of his exile. His family, the people who had cast him out as worthless, were suffering. Everything he had predicted would happen without his guidance had come to pass. He could take satisfaction in being proven right, could allow them to face the consequences of their choices without interference, or he could help. The iron cauldron sat empty beside his great hearth, polished to a dark gleam that reflected dancing flames. It was large enough to prepare food for dozens of people, designed for the hospitality that had once been the hallmark of great halls throughout the northern lands. Thornwick had used it to feed guests and retainers before madness corrupted his generosity into something darker. Bjorik had restored it with his own hands, pounding out dents, repairing cracks, bringing it back to full functionality. But he had never used it for its intended purpose. He had no guests to feed, no retainers to serve. It had been restored more as an act of craftsmanship than necessity. Now it might serve the purpose for which it had been made. The decision tortured him for days. Logic argued against any involvement with his former life. They had made their choice when they exiled him. Let them live with the consequences. He had built something good in his isolation, found peace in honest work and simple living. Why risk that tranquility for people who had shown him nothing but contempt? But emotion argued differently. They were still his blood, still his sons, still the people among whom he had grown up and formed his deepest bonds. Their suffering was real, regardless of who was to blame for it. And he had the means to help, food stores that would last through the worst winter, knowledge of survival techniques learned through hard experience, space in his hall for refugees if it came to that. More than anything else, he had something they desperately needed: leadership. Not the authority that came from position or birthright, but the kind that emerged from proven competence and genuine care for those who depended on it. He had spent 4 years learning to think beyond his own needs, to build something larger than personal ambition. The test was not whether he could help his family, it was whether he would choose to do so. As autumn deepened toward winter, Bjorik began his preparations. He expanded his food stores beyond what one man could possibly need, smoking extra fish and hunting more game than his usual careful conservation would allow. He prepared the hall's side chambers as sleeping quarters for multiple occupants, installing additional hearths and ensuring proper ventilation for the extra fires that would be needed. Most importantly, he prepared his mind for what might come. The bronze mirror showed him his own reflection clearly now, a man in his 50s, grayed by years but strengthened by honest work, marked by scars but not broken by them. The face looking back at him was not that of Bjorik the exile, nursing wounds and plotting revenge. This was Bjorik the builder, the guardian, the man who had found worth in service rather than domination. If his family came to his door seeking help, they would not find the bitter outcast they had driven away. They would find someone who had transcended their rejection, who had built something meaningful from their abandonment. Whether they could accept help from such a person remained to be seen. The first snows came early, confirming Sven's warnings about a harsh winter ahead. Within a week, the passes that connected Bjorik's valley to the outside world were blocked by drifts higher than a man's head. Anyone attempting the journey now would be risking their lives, driven by desperation rather than choice. Bjorik found himself watching the approach to his hall more often, listening for sounds that might indicate travelers struggling through the snow. Part of him hoped they would come, that his family would swallow their pride and seek the help they needed. Another part hoped they would stay away, that he could continue the peaceful existence he had built without the complications their presence would bring. But in the deepest part of his heart, he knew they would come, not because they had finally recognized his worth, but because they had no other choice. Desperation would drive them to his door, as surely as winter drove animals to seek shelter. The iron cauldron waited beside his hearth, ready to fulfill its purpose. The hall stood strong against wind and weather, prepared to shelter more souls than just its builder. And Bjorik himself waited, no longer the broken man who had fled into exile, but someone who had discovered that true strength came not from dominating others, but from serving them. Whatever came through his doors, he would be ready. The test of his transformation was about to begin. The wooden staff was carved from mountain ash and topped with a silver wolf's head, the symbol of leadership among his clan. Bjorik recognized it immediately when the first figure emerged from the swirling snow at his gates. It had been his father's staff, passed down through generations of jarls, and now it rested in hands that trembled not from cold alone, but from the weight of failed authority. Magnus came first, struggling through drifts that reached his waist. The staff clutched in his frozen hands like a lifeline. Behind him, barely visible through the storm, came the shapes of other travelers, more people than Bjorik had expected, moving with the desperate slowness of those pushed far beyond their limits. From his position at the hall's great doors, Bjorik watched his eldest son approach. 4 years had changed Magnus from a confident young warrior into something harder and more weathered. His face bore the marks of responsibility accepted too young, of decisions made without wisdom to guide them, of pride slowly ground down by circumstances beyond his control. "Father," Magnus called when he was close enough to be heard over the wind. The single word carried more weight than any speech, acknowledgement, plea, perhaps even apology. All wrapped in a voice cracked by cold and emotion. Bjorik stepped forward, and for a moment the two men faced each other across a distance that was measured in more than snow and ice. Behind Magnus, more figures emerged from the storm, Leif supporting an elderly woman, Eriksson and Thorvald helping others who could barely walk. A group of perhaps 30 people who represented all that remained of the proud clan that had cast Bjorik into exile. "You are welcome here," Bjorik said, his voice carrying clearly through the storm. He did not ask why they had come or what had driven them to his door. The answers were written in their faces, in their travel-worn clothes, in the way they leaned on each other for support. Magnus's legs gave out then, whether from exhaustion or relief Bjorik could not tell. The staff fell from his hands to disappear into the snow as he dropped to his knees in the doorway of the hall he had never seen completed. "We had nowhere else to go," he whispered, the words barely audible above the wind. "The settlement is lost. The food stores are gone. Half the clan scattered to find shelter wherever they could. We brought who we could save, but there are children among us, elders who cannot survive another night in the open." Bjorik looked past his son to the huddled group behind him. Indeed, there were children, thin faces peering out from inadequate wrappings, eyes wide with fear and cold. There were old people who had probably been clan elders once, reduced now to refugees dependent on the charity of others. There were men and women he had known since childhood, people who had shared his father's hall, who had supported his exile when times were good and choices seemed clear. "Come inside," he said simply, stepping back to give them passage into his hall. What followed was controlled chaos. 30 people stumbling into warmth after days or weeks of cold, desperate for food and shelter and safety. Bjorik moved among them with quiet efficiency, directing the worst cases to places near his great hearth, sending others to the side chambers he had prepared, assessing who needed immediate attention and who could wait. The iron cauldron came into its own. Within an hour, it bubbled with thick stew made from his stores, dried meat and vegetables, seasoned with herbs he had gathered over 4 summers in the mountains. The smell filled the hall like an embrace, and he watched his people, for they were his people, regardless of what had passed between them, begin to believe that they might actually survive. Leif approached him as he ladled stew into wooden bowls. Of his 2 sons, Leif had always been the more diplomatic, the one who thought before speaking. Now he looked older than his years, marked by the weight of decisions that had proven disastrously wrong. "The hall," Leif said, his voice filled with wonder as he looked around at the completed construction. "Father, what you have built here, it surpasses even grandfather's hall. The craftsmanship, the attention to detail, how did you manage such work alone?" "One stone at a time," Bjorik replied, continuing to serve food to people who had not eaten a proper meal in weeks. "One beam at a time, one day at a time." "We thought you would turn us away," Leif admitted, accepting a bowl of stew with hands that shook from more than cold. "We thought, after what we did, after how we treated you, we thought you would want revenge." Bjorik paused in his ladling, considering the words. Revenge. Yes. There had been times during the early months of his exile when such thoughts had warmed him through cold nights. Times when he had imagined his family begging for forgiveness, acknowledging their mistakes, admitting his worth, but looking at his son now, thin, exhausted, humbled by circumstances beyond his control. Bjorik found no satisfaction in vindication. These were not enemies to be defeated, but people to be helped, family members who had made the same mistake he might have made in their position. "Revenge serves no one," he said, resuming his work. "But hot food and warm shelter serve everyone." The golden arm ring had been his father's most treasured possession, not the silver one that marked the Jarl's authority, but an older piece, carved with protective runes and set with amber that glowed like captured sunlight. Eriksson wore it now as he approached Bjorik by the great hearth, his face a mask of conflicting emotions that spoke of pride warring with necessity. 3 days had passed since the refugees' arrival, and the hall had settled into something approaching normalcy. The immediate crisis was over. Everyone was fed, warm, and safe from the storm that continued to rage outside. But beneath the surface calm, deeper currents flowed. Power structures had collapsed, old certainties had crumbled, and difficult conversations could no longer be avoided. "Brother," Eriksson said, stopping just beyond the fire's warmth. The word came hard to him, weighted with years of rivalry and recent humiliation. "We must speak." Bjorik looked up from the carved drinking horn he had been cleaning, seeing in his younger brother's face the same mixture of defiance and desperation that had marked their childhood competitions. Eriksson had always been the more ambitious of the two, quicker to anger, slower to forgive. That he was here at all, in a hall built by the brother he had helped exile, spoke volumes about how dire their circumstances had become. "We must indeed," Bjorik agreed, setting the horn aside. But perhaps not here, with so many ears present. They walked to the smaller chamber that Bjorik used as his private quarters, leaving behind the warmth and companionship of the main hall for the cold honesty that waited between them. Eriksson moved like a man carrying an invisible weight, each step an effort of will over exhaustion. "You know why I have come," Eriksson began without preamble. "The settlement is finished. What buildings still stand are buried under snow and ice. The harbor is frozen solid. Even if we had ships left to sail, they would be trapped until spring. Half the clan is scattered to the four winds, seeking shelter wherever they can find it." "I know," Bjorik replied simply. "The question is not why you have come, but what you hope to accomplish now that you are here." Eriksson's hand went unconsciously to the golden arm ring, turning it slowly on his wrist. It was a nervous gesture that spoke of a man grappling with decisions too large for comfort. "The people need leadership," he said finally. "Real leadership, from someone who knows how to survive in harsh conditions, how to plan for difficulties, how to make the hard choices that keep a community alive. They have leadership," Bjorik pointed out. "You are their chosen Jarl." "I'm a failed Jarl," Eriksson said with bitter honesty. "I let pride cloud my judgment, refused advice from those who had more experience, made decisions based on what I wanted to be true rather than what actually was true. The clan is broken because of my failures." The admission hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Bjorik studied his brother's face, seeing in it the same struggle he had once faced himself, the choice between clinging to illusions of worthiness and accepting the harder truth of actual limitations. "What would you have me do?" Bjorik asked. Eriksson reached for the golden arm ring with his other hand, working it slowly off his wrist. The amber caught firelight and threw warm reflections across the stone walls as he held it out toward his brother. "Take back what should never have been taken from you," he said. Lead these people as you should have led them 4 years ago. Guide them through this crisis and back to something resembling prosperity. Bjorik looked at the offered ring without reaching for it. The gold was warm from Ericsson's body heat, the amber smooth from years of handling. It represented everything he had lost when the clan voted to exile him: authority, respect, the right to make decisions for others. It was vindication made manifest, proof that he had been right and they had been wrong. "And you?" he asked. "What becomes of the man who sought to replace me?" "I follow where wiser leadership directs," Ericsson replied. "I support decisions made by someone who has proven his worth through more than words and ambition. I become what I should have been from the beginning, a brother who serves rather than competes." The moment stretched between them, heavy with the weight of years and choices and consequences. Outside, wind howled through the mountain passes, but inside the hall there was only warmth and the soft sound of people who had found safety after long wandering. Bjorik reached out slowly and closed Ericsson's fingers around the golden ring, pushing his brother's hand gently back toward his chest. "I built this hall with my own hands," he said quietly. "Every stone fitted, every beam raised, every problem solved through patient work rather than inherited authority. That is the leadership these people need. Not someone who rules because of bloodline or political maneuvering, but someone who leads through proven capability and genuine service." Ericsson stared at him in confusion. "You refuse the ring?" "I refuse the burden," Bjorik corrected, "but not the responsibility. These people will survive the winter and they will rebuild their lives, but not because I wear gold on my arm or carry a staff that symbolizes power. They will survive because someone who cares about their welfare will ensure they have what they need to thrive." The carved wooden bowl had been his father's, used for the morning meal that began each day in the old hall. Simple pine, polished smooth by decades of use, it bore no decoration save the patina of time and care. Magnus had carried it through the storm, one of the few precious items salvaged from their lost home. Now it sat before Bjorik as he broke his fast on the first clear morning after the blizzard, filled with porridge made from grain that would last his expanded household through the remaining winter months. 3 weeks had passed since his family's arrival, and the hall had transformed again. Not in its physical structure that remained as solid and well-crafted as when he had completed it alone, but in its spirit. The empty spaces that had echoed with solitary footsteps now hummed with the quiet conversations of people building new routines, new relationships, new hope for the future. The children had adapted first, as children always did. They explored every corner of their new home with the fearless curiosity of youth, turning the hall's chambers into kingdoms for their games, accepting the strange circumstances of their refuge as simply another adventure. Their laughter filled spaces that had known only silence for too long, and Bjorik found himself pausing in his work simply to listen to sounds he had not realized he missed. The adults required more time to adjust. Years of viewing Bjorik as an exile, a failure, a cautionary tale about the consequences of weakness, could not be overcome in a few days of shared meals and shelter. But gradually, as they observed his competence in managing supplies, his skill in solving the countless small problems that arose when 30 people lived in close quarters, his quiet authority in making decisions that served everyone's welfare, old prejudices gave way to new respect. Ericsson had become his most valuable ally in this transition. The man who had once sought to replace him now worked tirelessly to support his leadership, translating Bjorik's decisions into terms the more stubborn refugees could accept, smoothing over conflicts that arose from stress and uncertainty, demonstrating through his own example that following Bjorik's guidance was not submission but wisdom. "You were right about the grain storage," Ericsson said, settling beside his brother at the great table. "If we had prepared as you always counseled, rationed as you always suggested, the settlement might have survived the winter." "Perhaps," Bjorik replied, though his tone suggested the past interested him less than the future. "But dwelling on what might have been serves no purpose. The question now is what will be. They had been having such conversations regularly, planning for spring and the decisions that would come with returning warmth. Some of the refugees spoke of returning to the coast, of attempting to rebuild the settlement that had failed them. Others talked of scattering to join distant relatives or seek new lives in foreign territories. But increasingly, conversations turned to a different possibility: staying in the mountains, building a new community around the hall that had proved its worth. The ancient map had revealed the valley's potential for more than survival. The trade routes it commanded, the resources it could access, the defensible position it offered, all suggested that a properly managed settlement could not only survive, but prosper in this remote location. And they had something no other mountain community possessed: proven leadership from someone who understood both the harsh realities of wilderness life and the complex needs of human community. Spring's first messenger arrived in the form of a raven that built its nest in the hall's restored eaves. The blackbird's presence meant that winter's grip was finally loosening, that the passes would soon be navigable again, that the time for decision was approaching. Within weeks, they would need to choose their path forward. Magnus approached his father as the evening meal was being cleared away, carrying in his hands the wolf-headed staff that had fallen in the snow during their arrival. He had spent days cleaning and polishing the carved wood, restoring it to the dignity it had possessed when their grandfather carried it. "This belongs to you," Magnus said, offering the staff with both hands in the traditional gesture of respect. "It always belonged to you. We were fools to think otherwise." Bjorik accepted the staff, feeling its familiar weight, remembering the pride he had once taken in carrying it. But the man who had coveted this symbol was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true authority came not from symbols, but from service. "It belongs to whoever can best serve our people," he said, turning the staff slowly in his hands. "For now, that appears to be me. But symbols are less important than substance, and substance must be proven daily through right action, not proclaimed through ceremony." He looked around the hall at the faces of his family and clanmates, seeing in them something he had not expected to find again: trust. Not the automatic deference due to inherited position, but the earned confidence that came from demonstrated competence and genuine care. "Tomorrow we begin planning for permanent settlement," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Those who wish to return to the coast when spring fully arrives are welcome to do so, and they will go with supplies and support for their journey. But this valley can support a thriving community for those who choose to stay. And I believe we can build something here better than what we lost." That night, alone in his chamber, with only the carved bowl and wolf-headed staff for company, Bjorik reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. 4 years ago, he had been a broken man fleeing into exile, carrying nothing but bitterness and pain. Now he was surrounded by family and community, respected for his achievements, trusted with the welfare of people who had once rejected him. The hall around him stood solid and warm, proof that with patience and persistence, even the most damaged things could be restored to beauty and purpose. Perhaps that was the greatest lesson this place had taught him, that neither buildings nor men were ever truly beyond redemption, only beyond the willingness to do the hard work that redemption required. Outside, spring was coming to the mountains. Inside, a new community was taking root in soil prepared by exile, loss, and the slow growth of wisdom. The cursed hall of Thornwick was cursed no longer, and the broken warrior who had claimed it had discovered that sometimes the greatest victories were won not through conquest, but through the quiet triumph of building something worthy from the ruins of what came before.